So Boker Tov, Bruchim Abaim, welcome everybody. Great to have you again on a Parsha Plus Thursday. We're going to do something a little bit different today, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. Don't worry, it won't involve any embarrassing questions or disclosures on your part, but it'll be a slightly different format than usual. So when I began reading this Parsha, Kitisa, other than being a very lengthy Parsha, there's certain elements that are quite familiar because we read some of these, certainly the part with regards to Moses pleading on behalf of the children of Israel not to destroy them. We read that on all the minor fast days. So we're familiar with that part, Psolecha, put together another set of tablets that you yourselves destroyed, God says to Moses. That's one of the parts. And there are other parts that we read on Pesach as well. And of course, it begins with there's an element of Shabbat. There's an element of the Mishkan. It's a smorgasbord of different events strung together. But as I was reading it came to me that there was almost, if I can use the word, and maybe it's the incorrect word, but maybe it is the right word, there was almost a Holocaust in the time of Moshe. God said, I'm going to destroy this whole people in a flash. They're going to be gone, and I'm going to take care of you, Moses. We'll start off something fresh with maybe a better choice of people that you can lead. But if you think about it, God could have destroyed a whole people, and what else would it be other than a Shoah, where you're wiping out a people because of the fact that they're a people. They're not behaving according to your plan. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so they are going to be destroyed as a people. It's not as individuals. It's not because one person did. And you can say that all those people may have been guilty of the golden calf, but it's hard to believe that everybody was equally guilty and certainly merited destruction and genocide to that extent. So we've never really looked at it that way. And I thought of that because I thought before, when God wipes out the Egyptian charioteers at the Red Sea, I don't know how many of you ever got close to shedding tears for those Egyptians who perished in the sea. And I imagine very few of us have. We look at the miracle, we see some phenomenal, bombastic Hollywood display on whatever film portrays it, whether the original 10 Commandments, and I'm not even talking about with Charlton Heston. There's an earlier 10 Commandments of the I think the late 20s or early 30s. But all these portrayals, I'm not sure how much of emotional response it elicits, other than, to be honest, Prince of Egypt. I recall when Moses is standing on one end and Pharaoh on the other end of the Red Sea, and you almost imagine them seeing each other, and Moses is pained by what's happening, both to his previous brother, almost half-brother Pharaoh, as well as all the Egyptians. That's the only time I've seen in a Hollywood portrayal, animated as it was, that there's some remorse and some genuine sadness about those how many thousands perished in the sea, according to the biblical narrative. So as I was thinking about all this, the news came up a couple of days ago that they found more mass graves in the Kisikus First Nation in Saskatchewan at 2 additional schools. And when we talk about potential destruction in the Bible and actual evidence of no less than genocide, however you call it, that's what it was. The way the indigenous people were treated for decades and longer, and certainly their experience in the residential schools. We tend to hear a story like that, and again, I don't know what your response is. I am greatly pained every time that comes up, but then it passes. The news becomes old 10 days, 2 weeks from now, and we move on to other things, and until another revelation comes up about some other residential school. And often when we talk about our own experience in the Shoah, and recently also with the residential schools, we're talking about tragedy, we're talking about destruction, we're talking about lost lives, we're talking about nameless children, because they're not even able to access some of the records from church and schools that, for whatever reason, keep those records hidden, which is a crime in itself. But what we've come to learn and appreciate, I think, in recent years, particularly in light of our experience in the Second World War, is that we can't only focus on the death camps. We have to focus on those people who perished and who they were, their lives. Sometimes that's done through the Spielberg films, where we get an opportunity to learn about somebody's experience, and they don't only talk about the horror they went through during the war, but they talk about their lives before and how meaningful those lives were. And for that reason, I thought that today I'd like to share with you something that I heard on a CBC show called Unreserved. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. It's narrated and managed by somebody by the name of Rosanna Deerchild. And every week she has another story. And the stories, there may be elements of tragedy, but the stories of people's lives where we get a chance to learn a little bit about some of the people who have suffered from these various incidents of residential school experience, or the 60s scoop, which we talk about, but we haven't really explored that. The residential schools have been the focus of much of our attention that's been given to Indigenous matters in recent years. So I wanted really to share with you this episode of Unreserved, and that's really what I want to do today. I want you to listen to it. It's about 45 minutes long. It's in 3 sections, and after each section, we're going to stop for a moment and give you a chance to comment or ask something about it. It's an audio program because it's on the radio. There are some photos that are shared through the website, and I'll move around so you can see some of the photos that they refer to, so it'll give you some context. But it talks about a fascinating story about somebody who was taken to a residential school in the 60s, and then something very, very interesting and different happened to them when they left the residential school. And that's the story we're going to listen to. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Just let me know when the sound comes up if you can actually hear it. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so just give me a thumbs up when you can hear the sound from this, okay?
I'm no longer a lost child out there somewheres, just dangling around out there. I'm no longer a lost child. I came in out of the cold into the light, and I'm sitting there and I'm saying, you know what? My story matters. All what I went through, all the abuses, and I'm here today. I matter.
That's Debbie Paul. She is Mi'kmaq from Shubenacadie First Nation in Nova Scotia. 50 years ago, Debbie was taken as part of the 60s scoop and left in a stranger's house. But there was no record of it. It was a burden of proof she carried for 50 years. Now, after years of searching, Debbie Paul has finally found her proof. But is it enough? Danse, Anine, Boujou, hello and welcome. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. When the Shubenacadie Residential School closed in 1967, 12-year-old Debbie Paul wasn't sent home. Instead, she was kidnapped by a nun who flew her out of Canada and abandoned her in a stranger's home in Rockland, Massachusetts. You would think taking a child across the border would leave a paper trail, some records, or witnesses. But for decades, Debbie has only had her word. Until now. The CBC's Trina Roach, an award-winning Mi'kmaq journalist, traveled to Massachusetts with Debbie to help retrace her steps to the beginning of her harrowing journey and finally bring her lost child home.
This picture was taken to give to my mother, and my mother never received it.
At her kitchen table, Debbie, Paul, and I flipped through old photos from the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School.
My God.
She spent 5 years there as a child.
I know that's me there, but I wish I was smiling. I think I looked scared more than anything, because I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen to me, and nobody cared. You're just a good little Indian, and you did what you were told.
When the school closed in 1967, Debbie was the last student to leave. A Catholic nun kept her back, told her to stay out of sight. Within days, she'd take the Mi'kmaq girl out of the country without her family's consent. A photo from that last day shows Debbie standing, arms stiff at her sides as instructed. Unaware, her life was about to take a harrowing turn. She was 12 years old.
This is the outfit that I wore on the way to the plane. That's my outfit, my watch, my outfit. I was all cleaned up, and they even permed my hair. My hair is straight, actually, kind of a little bit of curly, but they permed my hair. Sister Gilberta permed my hair and that, and my mother didn't even know I was being taken away. She signed no papers for me to be adopted out or taken across the United States border, Canada and United States border.
Debbie says she was singled out by the nun, Sister Gilberta, because of her talent for music.
I was very musical. Yeah, I played the recorder, and I played the piano, and I sang, and I could dance. I could do it all.
Sister Gilberta led the school choir, and school records show Debbie won high honors at music festivals.
This is you in the recorder. You said you were musical.
Musical, yeah.
There you are with the recorder there.
Yes. Oh, look at this.
There's you and Gilberta there, right?
Yeah. We were singing 10 Little Indians. Now I remember. 10 Little Indians. That was Sister Helena Patrick. And we were singing, you know, 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indians. 4 little, 5 little, 6 little Indians. Yeah, that's what it was. And we were all happy we were little Indians anyway. Actually, she called us savages. And she should have written there 1 little, 2 little, 3 little savages. That's the way they did it.
That's the way they sang it.
But we were singing 10 Little Indians.
In one photo, Gilberta wears a headdress, surrounded by 4 little Mi'kmaq girls dressed up in native or Indian costumes.
Sister Gilberta was all smiles. She's always all smiles in front of the camera, always. But man, that woman was mean. Strict, very strict.
Archival records list Gilberta as disciplinarian of girls.
We'd all stand in line to get our beating. It was church, you stand in line to get your beating. You get your beating, you're okay to leave, you know. But that's how I remember church, praying and getting a beating from her. When I first was there, I was only 6, and they said, put your hand out. Nun's going to give you a beating, and the girls don't you ever pull your hand away. Don't pull your hand away, you know, when they're going to hit you. Your instinct, someone's going to hit your instincts to move back. We were told not to. We were conditioned not to. And then, so I wanted to know, being smart ass, I wonder how come, right? So I put my hand on Sister Gilberta, missed me. And she took my hand and she beat me with that strap. A strap is horsehide or whatever it was, but and it hurt. My hand was hurt and stuff like that. And then big girls said to you, "Don't you cry. Don't cry. Take it." And you know how strong your mind is when you're telling a little girl, don't you cry, and you're beating the crap out of her, you know, just because you moved your hand. But that's pretty mean. That is, and that's not the only time she was disciplinary. She did a lot.
Sister Gilberta's real name was Eleanor Keller. When the school closed, she lured Debbie to the airport with the promise of music lessons.
I didn't realize where she was taking me. I didn't know where. I mean, I lived in that residential school for 5 years, you know. I didn't know what a plane was, whatever.
The nun flew Debbie from Halifax to Boston. No one questioned her about traveling with a child.
When we went across the border, it was like show and tell. I got this cute little Indian girl. She's my ward. I'm looking after her. So sister, in them days, I guess you didn't have to have paperwork at all. Couldn't have, because I had no paperwork going through. Sister Gilberta basically pat me on the head. Oh yeah, she said, you know. And so I would just sit there and smiling at people. What I did what I was told. You know, don't say nothing, but do a lot of smiling. So I smiled, you know, and so people were, they looked at that, and it was easy for them to go through. It's just, you know, nobody stopped them. You could have done anything with the children. Anything.
Sister Gilberta then drove Debbie out of Boston to the town of Rockland and the home of the nun's brother and sister-in-law, Mr. and Mrs. Wentworth. Gilberta abandoned Debbie with them, a white family the girl didn't know. Debbie says she was treated like a maid and abused.
I went through hell.
The promise of music lessons was broken. Debbie was enrolled at the local public school, and as a young Mi'kmaq girl, she remembers being the only person of color and feeling unwelcome.
That whole town didn't want me there. That town discriminated against me even before I knew what discrimination was.
A year later, without notice or explanation, the Wentworths sent Debbie back to Canada by herself.
They put me on a plane. I was only 13. They gave me no paperwork, not a letter, nothing. They just put me on the plane.
Debbie arrived in Halifax alone. No one came to pick her up. No one knew she was coming home. They didn't even know where she had been. She waited for hours, then fell asleep on a bench at the airport. In the middle of the night, a janitor woke her. She couldn't say where she was going, and the young Mi'kmaq girl didn't even remember her mother's name.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. Today we're listening to Burden of Proof, a documentary by Mi'kmaq journalist Trina Roach. After enduring an abusive year in the Wentworth home, Debbie was shipped back to Halifax. Abandoned again, she tried to put the year of hell behind her. But decades later, the Canadian government would reawaken her memories.
In 2018, the Canadian government agreed to compensate survivors of the 60 scoop, an era when child welfare authorities removed so many Indigenous children from their families and placed them in strangers' homes, away from their communities and cultures. Nearly 35,000 survivors have applied for compensation. Hundreds have been rejected and can appeal if they provide more information. So while the government says it will pay, much of the onus falls on survivors to find proof, evidence of traumatic events from their childhood, from a time with major gaps in records.
I have no proof. None. No records. They have no records. They couldn't find anything. Nothing.
When I met Debbie Paul, she was caught in this appeal process.
And they said to me, unable to confirm that you were placed in a long-term care with non-Indigenous parents within the meaning of the settlement agreement.
She wanted to keep searching. She knew there must be proof somewhere. For Debbie, it's about more than compensation. It's about validation.
I'm not lying. Please believe me, I'm not lying.
I shared Debbie's story with CBC's Indigenous-led investigative team. We dug in. Slowly, piece by piece, the names and places Debbie recounted clicked into place. We contacted the school Debbie attended in Rockland, and they began to search for her report card. Debbie had already made calls to try to find those papers, but had hit roadblocks. We decided to go in person, travel back to the States together with Debbie to help her retrace her steps.
Flag.
In 800 feet, turn right onto Myrtle Street.
Oh, we're almost there.
Almost there.
We're almost there. And you remembered Myrtle Street.
Take the next right onto Myrtle Street.
Here we go, Debbie. Here we are on Myrtle Street.
Now,
We arrive at the house where Debbie had lived with the Wentworths more than 5 decades ago. They're no longer alive, but the porch, the house, trigger memories of abuse.
What does it do for you to be here now? Like, what does it do 5 decades later for you to stand here and look at the house? Does it help?
it helps to heal, to face it, not to be scared of it, to face it, to look at it and look at it in the face and says, yeah, I faced it today. I faced the wrongdoing that was done to me today.
Debbie wants to revisit another house she remembers.
I always gravitated to the piano. I just loved the piano. And Mrs. Rome, 86 Summit, her house way down the end of the street, she had a piano. I was friends with her daughter, and we'd play in the schoolyard and that, and then we'd go home. I'd do my chores, and then I would go down to their house. And Mrs. Rome would always let me play the piano.
We drive down the road, the same short distance Debbie used to ride her bike, to a small bungalow where Mrs. Rome lived.
The house is still standing. The memories are still there. They're good memories. The other place was bad memories, but this little house is a good memory. I love it so much. Good house.
Debbie found refuge here as a child.
I mean, there was a lot of love in that house. You know, I didn't get any love out there unless it was abuse, physical abuse. But here, there was a lot of good, you know, you're a good girl, good job, or I like what you're playing, or I like what you're singing. I mean, it was love. They gave me so much love. Love I really needed, and Mrs. Rome did that. And her kids just loved me, and I loved their kids. I just loved it here, you know. When you're in the residential school, you don't get loving. When I went to Mary, Mrs. Rome's house and stuff, she gave me love. She gave me huggings. She let me do things, you know. This woman and her family made me feel welcome. They did not judge me. There was no discrimination, nothing. I was just pure acceptance. Human to human, I guess. That's the only thing I could call it. Human to human. They treated me like a human being with respect, dignity, love.
Debbie wonders how different life would be if she had lived here instead of with the Wentworths. But the Romes moved away long ago.
You have these memories here, and you can place yourself here.
Yeah.
But now you still need the paperwork.
Okay. Let's go get it then.
Let's go get it.
We get back in our car and drive along the town's main street to the Rockland Public School. Inside the school, an administrator is waiting for us.
So this is Debbie Paul.
She hands Debbie a paper. It reads, Student Record, 1968, Deborah Ann Paul, under the guardianship of Mrs. John Wentworth.
Mr. John Wentworth. That's that, and it's got the seal. And that's, oh my God, that's the family you lived with? Yeah, that's the family I lived with. This, oh my God.
Finally, proof.
They got Mrs. John Wentworth was my guardian.
So it says you came and enrolled in school
67,
on September 6,
6,
1967.
left June.
You left June
Two,
18th.
yeah,
So you were here for one school year.
one school year. Did I get any Fs?
I don't think you did.
No, I didn't.
Debbie, how does it feel now to see that this is you?
Yeah,
And
this is
your
me.
record, and this is what you were looking for.
This is what I was looking for. Guardian. My God, this proves everything. This little piece of paper, and if the 60 scoop doesn't accept this documentation, and it's got a grand seal, it's sealed and everything. It's not made up, it's sealed and stuff like that. And you know what? Then if they don't accept this and they write me another no, it just goes to prove that they're just... How many people did they dismiss so far without not filing any papers? I waited 2 years for a consideration, telling me, oh, you don't need your records, and then they couldn't find my records, and I had to go out and get them. Just because of that stupid little thing there, that stupid page that says, so if we couldn't find them, then you have to go and get them. And how long did it take? It took me forever, but you guys were on the job and you did it, and you got me here. I just hope this will help people, will help all the ones that they say, that you didn't experience that. That didn't happen to you. Well, it did happen. And it's unfortunately, but it did happen. And it's just to say, here's my proof.
We have one more surprise for Debbie. In our research, we found Mrs. Rome. Mary is now 93 years old and eager to reunite with Debbie. We connect the two over Skype.
Hello,
Hello, Mrs. Rome.
Debbie. How wonderful! How you make me cry.
Me too, but you didn't change much.
Oh, Debbie.
The women lean toward their computer screens and hold up photos of one another.
Oh my goodness.
Can you see it clear?
Yes, I can.
What is that?
Oh my God, I don't know, but I look young.
Isn't she sweet?
Yeah.
That's my girl. Isn't she
That's your
sweet?
girl.
Yes, sirree.
Oh my goodness.
I'm so glad to have these pictures still. Wait till I show you the other thing.
Okay.
Mary holds up a brown doll with braids and regalia.
Debbie's little Indian doll.
You sent that to me the first Christmas you were gone.
Oh my goodness.
And I sat with it and cried.
Oh my God, I can't believe it, Bana. You just look the same. To me, you look the same. You didn't change.
I didn't have white hair then.
You got beautiful white hair. I just want to reach out and love you and hug you, and I love you so much, and I love your family, and I thank you so much for giving me so much love.
We didn't give you enough. We could have given you so much more.
It was enough for me. It was enough.
Good.
Okay?
That feels good to me.
It was enough.
Feels real good.
Debbie may never find the answers to some of her questions. How and why a Catholic nun took a young Mi'kmaq girl with a talent for piano and left her in another country. Will she receive compensation? Is this enough to prove her life was, in fact, uprooted? But she finds closure.
I'm no longer a lost child out there somewheres. That's what I'm taking home. I mattered.
That that was Burden of Proof, a documentary about Debbie Paul's journey to prove what happened to her as a child. Debbie's story was told by investigative journalist Trina Roach. You're listening to Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. Today, the story of a child's survival and the tenacity it took to prove what happened to her 50 years ago.
So that's the first part. I wanted to maybe give you a chance to comment or ask anything about what you've heard so far. There are a couple of other interesting parts coming up as well. Lynn, go ahead.
I recently read a very interesting book called Five Little Indians. I don't know whether you're familiar with it.
Yes. Yes.
It was really revealing about the aftermath for 5 different people of the residential schools, and it was very good. I just wanted to mention that.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because when you reading that book, and I won't give away because if you haven't read it, it's really a must read. You know, the impact that it has on people, as you can imagine, is tremendously varied. Some people are able to cope and some not at all. And as we see the next 2 sections of this documentary, you'll see, and I think you're getting an idea as well, how Debbie Paul has coped with this, and what she's taken from her experience and what she has done with her life in spite of what she went through. Barb, go ahead.
Lynn, thank you very much for mentioning that, because I did read the book and it was riveting, and what an eye-opener. We think that we are aware of things that went on and took place, and we're not.
So I'll just make a couple, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sorel, you wanted to? Able to unmute yourself? Oh, sorry. Just press it again, my apologies. There you go.
Okay, is the resilience that she represents of the people who went through those horrendous experiences, and this is mild probably in comparison to what many of the young people, the youngsters lived through, but the fact that she's there to tell the story, and I think the person who helped her find her place, I don't think there's enough presented in the world today, certainly in Canada today, that indicates what these people need, did, and have to have compensation for, as well as a difference in their lives. This woman is extraordinary, but she's there to tell the story and walk with the reporter or the writer through the experiences. I'm riveted with that whole process, knowing that people can compensate for themselves, can learn to change and grow, and we don't pay enough attention to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Bela, go ahead.
Without rancor, I mean, her ability to not express, and perhaps this is just the way it was edited, the anger that could be directed to the church is just, that to me is the biggest toll. I mean, you can hear these stories, you can understand the resilience, you can understand how these people have suffered, and truly, I just don't understand the vacuum that exists between the responsibility of what the church did and how we haven't done anything. Well, I shouldn't say that, how difficult it is to get to the root of. And if you think about when you started this about the comparison to the Holocaust type of, the responsibility of those people, I think that's what I find so difficult to accept. These people are resilient and remarkably so. Maybe it's because they were in a group. I don't understand. I just don't understand being able to be that resilient. But the responsibility of the people who inflicted that upon a population, a young group, yeah, is just I can't, that I have difficulty with.
Okay, I'll make just a couple of very super brief comments and then we'll continue. Two things that came up for me in this section is they talk about denial, the fact that there's an incredible amount of denial about what happened, and this is what Debbie Paul has encountered during her life. A denial that the kids went through this, about the 60s scoop, their experience in residential schools. And we often talk about denial in our own historical traumatic context, specifically related to the Shoah. We're dealing with it today. And if anything, it gives us an opportunity to identify with something that these survivors, victims, witnesses have gone through and continue to face today as well. And the second thing is that what comes to mind, and we'll see more of this as we go on, so I don't want to belabor the point. When I look at somebody like Mary Rome, I think of righteous Gentiles during the Second World War. Here is somebody who, perhaps not with the element of danger to their own well-being that some of the people during the Shoah, the risks they took, but here's somebody who stood outside of convention and did what she knew was right. Again, even if there was no risk to her, she did something that others were not doing. And that is an act of righteousness in and of itself. So we'll continue with the next section.
Trina Roach is the investigative journalist who brought us Debbie Paul's story. She's a member of the Glooscap First Nation and an award-winning Mi'kmaq journalist who teaches journalism at the University of King's College in Halifax. Hello, Trina.
Hello, Rosanna.
Well, this is just an incredible story, and what a journey for both you and Debbie. When did you first know that her story needed to be told?
I was working with CBC. The Investigates team set up to look into residential schools. And I said, it's important to ask in the community, what research that people in the community want to have done. And I talked to someone who lives in Sebeganagadi. He's a neighbor of Debbie Paul. And the first thing he said was, you need to hear Debbie Paul's story. And so I had a long conversation with Debbie. We spoke for about an hour just over the phone. And as her story unfolded, and her memory is so strong, and I was taking notes, it was so compelling right off the bat. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is a story that needs to be told. She's ready to tell it. It hasn't been a story that she's repeated very often, but she's ready to tell it now. And she needs to tell it so she can get the compensation that she deserves.
And what struck you most about her story?
This is a story, that really took place 5 decades ago, but still it impacts how Debbie sees herself. It has shaped her. She still lives with that. It still impacts her today, and not just in terms of the compensation, but how she sees herself, how she still has to remind herself, that, I'm not that kid anymore, that I matter. And she said that again and again throughout the story, in conversations I had with her off camera many times. And so I thought, this kind of trauma that Indigenous peoples experience, it doesn't go away. You don't just grow out of it. It sticks with you and shapes how you see yourself and how you think others see you for the rest of your life. So that's unique to Debbie, but I think it's probably something that a lot of people can relate to, especially survivors.
Absolutely. There's so many reflections and things that seemed familiar to me in watching that story and listening to Debbie's story from my own mother's, residential school past and so on. The story that you wrote online is aptly called Burden of Proof. The government claims it's willing to compensate 60 Scoop survivors, but the onus is on them to provide that paperwork, that proof from their childhoods. How difficult is that for survivors?
It's very challenging. You have, Debbie, who is not on Facebook, not someone who can do, extensive, deep research. I mean, she was trying. It's not like she just started when I got involved. But she felt that the challenge for her is, it's traumatic. It also requires research skills. And the papers she needed are in a different country. And I tell you, it's not just Debbie who wants records. That is a repeated theme that I've heard in conversations with other survivors. I just want the records. I just want access to the records. And some of those records are available either through the federal government and Library and Archives Canada or the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, the records that they get, they're sort of, putting them online as they're able to. But you still have to be able to navigate through those sites. And it is a massive challenge, I think, when you're looking at a certain demographic that's aging, to be able to access that kind of information.
Mm-hmm. And you were able to track down those records from the school that Debbie attended in Rockland, Massachusetts, and you decided to travel down there with her. Why did you want to make that trip together?
I think for Debbie, she was keen to tell her story, but really she was nervous to go. And to know that she would be going with me and Jillian Taylor, a CBC producer who's also First Nations, and myself who's Mi'kmaq, that was comforting to Debbie, so that she wasn't there by herself having these moments and maybe not even finding what she needed.
Right. That's interesting to me that you pointed out that you as a Mi'kmaq person and Jillian Taylor as a First Nations person went with her. Do you feel that it made a difference that you were Indigenous and had the knowledge of that history?
I think it did. It made a difference for Debbie, and I know that because she just said it. Right. She said it. But she felt like she could trust us. That we got it. And I have that feeling too. I've spent my whole career, I am Mi'kmaq, but I've also spent my whole career telling stories about Indigenous people, about Mi'kmaq people. And I think that being Mi'kmaq doesn't inherently give you some sort of ability to do sensitive storytelling. Mm-hmm. that is a skill you sort of gain over time in terms of understanding that, I bear a responsibility to people in my story, and I always wonder if that's more than if I just worked in mainstream news and was covering, City Hall and this and that. When you're going into Mi'kmaq communities and you're sort of stepping into people's lives, there's a weight there and there's a responsibility, and you learn that if you're going to earn that trust, you have to keep that trust and maintain that trust. The relationship between you and the person you're doing a story on takes on a bit of a different feel.
Yeah. What are the moments you'll most remember from that experience?
I have to say there's two, and I think they stand out in the story. When she saw her school record, the emotion in Debbie, the sense of just knowing how important it was, even if she doesn't get the compensation, just the fact that it proved her story was true, that sense of validation, which was so important to Debbie. And Debbie said, I matter. And that was incredible. But the phone call, the Skype call with Mary Rome, who's now Mary Shanklin, I was standing off camera crying.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I was weeping like a baby when oh gosh, so beautiful.
It was. I'll just never forget that. I'll just never forget that.
Often people think that journalists have to be, unbiased and maybe unfeeling at some point. But you're saying that you cried and you had all these emotional connections and feelings with her. How did it feel to hear these things click for her and hear her say, I matter. This is proof. I'm not lying.
It was incredible for me. And I have to say, because now I'm teaching journalism and I've given lectures on this myth of an unbiased journalist.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that exists. We all have a social location. We all have a point of view. Just as a journalist, the tools we employ to craft our stories make it fair and balanced and accurate, right? Accuracy is the key to what makes journalism.
Right.
And so, if I'm feeling emotionally impacted by Debbie's story, that doesn't make it less accurate. In fact, I think that emotional accuracy is just as important in storytelling. And most times when I've talked to somebody who said, oh, I got taken out of context, they're talking about another interview they did. Often they're referring to that emotional, because they might have said the words, the quote is accurate, but maybe it's the emotional context that they're talking about. So emotional accuracy is just as important. And to get that right, you have to really understand and be empathetic and be connecting with the person you're doing a story on.
Yeah, I'm going to take your class at the University of King's College.
I would love to have you in my class.
Sitting in the back. Thank you so much for your time, Trina, and use your power for good.
Thank you, Willalin. Thank you, Rosanna.
Katrina Roach is an investigative journalist from Glooscap First Nation. She spent months digging into Debbie Paul's story. We reached her in Uktubuktut, also known as Halifax. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM, and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild.
Okay. So one section left to go. Any comments about this last piece here? Go ahead, Beth.
So true what they said around any kind of abuse, insofar as validation, honesty, and sharing. So it's beautifully done. Sorry, it's beautifully done and so meaningful. Thank you for sharing, Michael.
Anyone else? So I think part of the challenge of somebody being willing to share their story with such honesty and disclosure is being able to share it with somebody, as in her words, we got it, somebody who understands. And I know when we read accounts of people, particularly in the Me Too movement with women who've suffered abuse under different circumstances, the need to be able to share that with either a journalist or somebody who understands, not necessarily somebody who's experienced it, but somebody who gets it, because there's some connection that they've been able to make rather than somebody who has no connection whatsoever. And I think part of the success of this interview is the fact, as the journalist said, that they get it because they have they come from that background. They either have family who've experienced something similar, and so there's a immediate connection, and particularly the most important thing, this idea of trust. You can open up and share something because that person understands and can empathize with what you've experienced. And I don't know how many of you heard Cora's drasha a couple of weeks ago when she talked about emotions and the legitimacy and importance of emotions when looking at and trying to understand narrative in the Shoah, in the Holocaust, and legitimizing that expression of emotion in any historical circumstance. And I think this is very powerful as well, this idea that you can't be detached and tell a story objectively without finding any connection with the story. If you want that story to have any meaning, significance, relevance for your audience, you have to allow that emotional element to come through, and that's no less an important part of a documentary of testimony than the hard, cold facts are. And I think this comes up beautifully as expressed in the words of the journalist. One last section.
Debbie Paul is now 66 years old. She still remembers Mrs. Rome, the only adult, Debbie says, who showed her any kindness after she'd been uprooted from her First Nation and her family as a child. Mrs. Rome, as Debbie knew her, lived up the street from the home Debbie was forced to live in Rockland, Massachusetts. Her name is Mary Shanklin now, and she no longer lives in Massachusetts, but right here in Canada. She is 93. Hello, Mary.
That's me.
And hello, Debbie.
Hello.
Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Well, let's just dive right into this. I was so moved by both your story and your reunion and the love that you have shown each other. I mean, I cried like a baby. So,
well, we cried too.
Absolutely, I know. We were all crying together. What was it like for you, Debbie, to see and hear from Mrs. Rome again?
You know, I thought Mrs. Rome passed away, but she didn't. And when I heard she was alive and they got a hold of her and she changed her name back to her maiden name and that.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I was astonished. I said, oh my God, where is she? I want to see her. I want to reach out and love her and hug her. And, I just wanted to thank her so much for what that love she gave me, was enough for me for all my adventures that I went through in my life. But I hung on to that love. I hung on to her memory, and because of her, I don't think I would be the person I am today, because she showed me love. She opened up her heart, and that's hard to do when you're talking about a residential school child, because they kind of don't trust. They don't trust white people too much,
No, you have reason to feel that way.
Yeah.
Now, you obviously have some very dark memories from the school and from your time in Massachusetts, Debbie, but there was also love and there was also joy, and there was those moments where you felt safe and welcome, and that was in Mrs. Rome's house. What kinds of things did you do at her house?
She would let me play the piano. I love the piano, I played with the girls outside, and she invited me to dinner. That was the most, I couldn't believe. I'm an Indian girl. I'm a child. I'm an Indian, and you don't expect to be invited to people's houses. I never did.
But you see, you're, Debbie, you to us, you were not, and I don't use the word Indian, but
No.
the Indian girl. You were a child.
A child. I was a
like
child
the other
first.
children. You were a child.
Child first. But a lot of people, went through life, and you're not. You're not. You're an object to do whatever the adult wanted.
Yeah.
That's the sad truth.
Yeah.
A child doesn't have the choices of no power. You're helpless. You need care. And yeah, that's what the Rome kids had care. And when you were with us, you were the same as the Rome kids. We ate together. If you want to play the piano, play the piano. Want to climb the apple tree, climb the apple tree.
Yeah.
And do you remember what Debbie was like as a child, Mary?
She was just like my Leslie and Amy and Jonathan and the Dolans and the Kathleen across the street and Patricia, and I name all the little names. Oh, it was a neighborhood, and people were good people. I suppose it's naive of me not to think there could be somebody, but I didn't know anything like I know now about John Wentworth. No, he just worked at the post office, and and I didn't know. I feel guilty. I somehow didn't know, but should have known. Maybe I don't how I would have known. She was good at hiding things, of course. With fear, you hide anything.
Yep.
And beatings? No. I just wish I'd known. I wish I'd known, and if I'd known, I would hope I would have done something. I know I would have. I know. I'm sure I would have.
This is the path I was meant to take, for lessons, life lessons to pass on to people. And this is what my journey talking about in that. It's meant to be passed on to people.
I appreciate what you're saying now. That I appreciate that very, very much. But no child should be a victim to pass on values that we're missing in. Oh.
Yeah. We lived in different times over 50 years ago when I was there. Different times now. When I was in that Indian residential school, Shubenacadie Indian residential school, I was there 5 years, like I said. I was told, all these little kids were told not to talk about it, not to share it. You were forbidden to tell anybody what was going on, or you would get a beating. And you learned under those conditions not to say anything. Even with me being the last child leaving, I had my aunt come over. She said, I wish I knew I would have taken you. We knew. But I never shared my story. We were shown not to talk, not to say anything, or you would get a beating. And those beatings that we got, they were a leather strap, nice thick leather strap. And we would get those beatings. And you didn't want a beating. And I just learned to shut my mouth. Not to say anything.
You coped with it. Oh.
Yeah.
You had no choice.
No choice, none.
And fear is a powerful emotion.
Yeah.
And especially in a child who has no power.
None.
You're a victim of whatever people around you do to you, for you, about you. Your child takes the human child takes so long to mature. It needs such care. I spent my life in education with children, and I've seen a lot. And fear is a powerful, powerful tool if someone wants to implant it in someone and not to tell.
Yeah.
It works.
It does.
Works. Sure does.
Yeah.
And you didn't see anything like that. The Rome kids didn't see anything like that.
No.
And I figured everybody else was kind too. Oh, the Wentworths had taken you in. And I had a seed of anything. Maybe I didn't, look in your eyes and I would have seen it. But then you probably wouldn't have told me anyway.
No. No.
Yeah.
No.
You were
But
good
you
at covering up. Good at
Yeah,
it.
very good. Most of us kids in that residential school, that's what we were taught. Keep your mouth shut, and then when you get old enough and you try to say something, you would get beaten down. And I guess you beat a child down for so long, they just quit.
That's why you're such a miracle. You are a miracle, what you did with your life. Because if you had a perfect, that's a funny word to use, you had a reason to sit in the corner in a fetal position and not do anything with your life at all. And you didn't. I've come to the conclusion through thinking more and more about connecting with you, and I've always kind of had seeds of thought of this because, I've studied psychology and I'm a psychologist. But anyway, you came, something when you were born, it was in there already. That courage or grit or get up and do it, or I don't know how. You didn't have any reason to even care to try. How could you trust anybody anymore? How could you, any adult at all,
It took a lot.
It did take a lot. Mary, you had started telling me the story about the doll, and I'd love to hear the story about this doll that you held on to 50 years.
It's so cute, the doll, the little Indian doll. And for years and years, she had little plastic moccasins on. Yeah. The first Christmas that you were gone, that doll came in the mail. And I sat with it and cried. I said, she sent me herself.
You know what I did to earn that doll? And when you showed it to me, I said, oh my God, I remember. But
what?
I scrubbed floors. I babysit people. This one man would let me iron his shirts for 25 cents each. I picked bottles. I did things. I bought that doll. Then I had to go down to Shubenacadie and mail it. But that doll represents how, to send it, to be a child, and you scrub. I know. Floors. And that's what I did. I babysat people's kids and for a little bit of money. And, my mother and my stepfather drank too much and stuff. So I ended up doing a lot of babysitting and stuff. But that's what I did to send that doll to you. That doll is a journey. I have people who come to me and say, I can't believe she saved that doll. That doll represents everything.
Yep. I had that doll. She came with me. First, I moved to New Hampshire for a couple of years. And then I went back to Rockland again. And then I came to Canada years after that. And wherever I went, the doll always came. Oh, of course. Yeah. The doll that Debbie gave me. Yeah. That's my doll. And without her moccasin shoes.
Debbie, why did you do that? Why did you want to save up and send Mrs. Rome that doll?
I don't know. It was just the right thing to do, you know, and this is going to sound strange, but sometimes you can turn around and tell what somebody needs without even meeting them, you just feel it, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what I felt. I felt when I seen that doll, I bought it with my little bit of money I had, and I mailed it out. I remember that street so well, 86 Summit Street. I'll never
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and I mailed that doll to Mrs. Rome
yeah,
at 86 Summit Street, Rockland. You
yeah.
know, I never knew it was going to get there. I had no idea, but I sent it because I think in my heart, I knew that was the right thing to do. And I can't
Yeah.
believe that this doll became a symbol, you know, it's a symbol of my journey, my life journey, I
Yeah.
guess.
And you can't have it back either.
No. That's funny. Yeah, well, you know.
And now that you both have had some time to reflect since your first chat, is there anything else that you'd like to say to each other that you haven't yet?
Well, when I wrote you, I emailed you and I called you an elder. It's, you could be old, but you cannot be an elder. You know, not everybody can be an elder, really, but you have that spirit. You taught, you have that good spirit. You have a good angel, a good spirit. And to me, you know, you gave of yourself. An elder will give of themselves. And that's what you did. So I always knew you by Mrs. Rome, but it was better for me to call you Elder Mary. But I didn't want to call you Mary without your permission. So I called you Elder. And to me, that means so much. That means more than anything to call you Elder. And it's
well,
a
I
term.
love the sound of it, and I actually like the sound when you called me Mrs. Rome. It had been a long time since I've been called Mrs. Rome, and it was good memories there too. So,
you know, I do want to come up and visit you and stuff, but I want to wait till this Omicron virus and we get the okay.
Oh, I know. Oh, I want you here. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, me too.
Okay. Okay.
I love you. I love you so much.
I love you too. I love you too. I love you more than you love me. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, sweetheart. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, indeed. I'm sure your next visit will be full of love and kindness. Thank you both for that conversation. It was beautiful and inspiring. That's Debbie Paul and her former neighbor, 93-year-old Elder Mary Shanklin. As for Debbie's 60 scoop claim, it's still in the appeals process. She is still waiting.
Anyone have any final comments or remarks? Barb, go ahead.
Thank you very much for this. You'd never, ever know who you are going to reach or what impact it's going to have. And this was incredibly personal for me. It was really something to hear Mary say that she was guilty, not knowing about what was going on in her very neighborhood, and that she was glad that her neighbors had taken her in and were raising her. Many, many years ago, decades ago, there was a family on our street who adopted an Indigenous little girl, and everybody was so excited and wonderful, and it was really, you know, terrific. They now had this child, and they were raising her. I think that they got her when she was about 6 or 7. And little did we know, as I am now learning in the past 2 years, the origins of this girl, that she was really taken from her family in, I think it was Alberta. And unfortunately, she is one of the statistics that we hear about in negative terms, that at the age of 16, she was on drugs, she ran away, she was difficult with the law. And I was living right across the street. I knew them. We would play with her, and to know her background is absolutely devastating. And I really found that quite something. Also, on an incredible personal note, I had the opportunity to be in Rockland, Massachusetts, many years ago for a weekend, and I can't believe the coincidence. But now, I hope Michael and all of you, I'm going to ask for your indulgence as I read to you something that I wrote back in July. Would that be okay? Remembering lost souls. Our Canadian pride is tainted. Our hearts are broken. How blinded we allowed ourselves to be. Remember, remember, do not forget the names of those leaders whose bias stole the culture, the language, and the lives of the spiritual peoples who first inhabited this land. We understand. We cannot fathom the reality of the horror that was done. Once derogatory names of Indian and Eskimo, now Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. 215, 751, 182, 160, 215, and now 54. Only the tip of the iceberg of ignorance, shame, and murder. May their souls rest in peace. May their memory be for a blessing. And let us say, Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb.
Wow. Things like that only get worse. They never get better.
That's an appropriate point at which to part ways for today. Thank you, Barb, for sharing that. Thank you all for having the patience to listen to a story. And I think that we need to be doing more of that. We have our own stories that we need to listen to and we need to be attentive to. And we need to listen to other stories because I think, as the journalist says, we get it. We know where these people have been, if not personally, certainly through other generations of our own people. And we need to make sure that their stories are told. Ignorance is no excuse. And the ability, as Mary did, to acknowledge that things were going on under her nose without her being aware and even possibly imagining that people could act that way is no excuse for us. We need to continue to learn about our own experiences, and we need to continue to learn about the experience of those who live in this country and with whom we share all its resources and benefits. So I hope that's inspired you to continue to research on this topic and many others. And I thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And
Thank you, Michael.
Barb. That was beautiful.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Michael, for the insight and the teaching, always.